Welcome to the Bloomberg Markets Podcast. I'm Paul Sweeney, alongside my co-host, Matt Miller.
Every business day, we bring you interviews from CEOs, market pros, and Bloomberg experts, along with essential market-moving news.
Find the Bloomberg Markets Podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and at Bloomberg.com/podcast. Right now, we want to get back to the story, the front page story, which is obviously what's happening in Israel. Khaled Elgindy, senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, joins us here. Khaled, thanks so much for joining us here. We know you have so much expertise in this part of the world. I wonder if you could just, for a lot of us, we're just not sure what's happened over the last several days. Can you give us a sense of why Hamas did what they did on Saturday? Why did they do it? What was their goal, if any? And then where do we go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to why Hamas would carry out, such a horrific attack that has killed hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000 Israelis. I don't understand the logic behind it. I think it's totally unjustifiable. But what I can speak to is the context in which this is happening.
Okay.
And that is, Israel has occupied, has ruled over the Palestinians, 5 million Palestinians in a military occupation for more than half a century, had many, many generations of Palestinians who've grown up without really knowing any sort of freedom. And in Gaza in particular, you have a very severe blockade that Israel has imposed that has impoverished the Gaza Strip, and most of the 2 million people who live in Gaza actually rely on international assistance for their basic needs. And so that's the context in which this is happening, as well as the sort of broader sense of despair among Palestinians that there is no end in sight, either to Israel's occupation, which is quite violent and repressive, or to the blockade in Gaza. And so Hamas is one of the various Palestinian factions that have embraced what they call armed struggle and are determined to pursue to push back on and resist Israeli occupation through violence. Of course, the violence that they've opted for in this case is wholly unjustified in that it's directed at civilians.
Yes, and seems to be specifically directed, according to the New York Times report on hostages this morning, at women and children as well, which doesn't make any sense. I think that those of us who've read pretty in depth about this, not nearly as much as you have. You've studied Arab studies at Georgetown and Indiana University. You've taught that at Georgetown as well, and obviously you're at the Middle East Institute. But I think we understand to some extent the context of the occupation. One thing that we have trouble divining is how much support Hamas has in Gaza and from Palestinians. And I noticed in a lot of reports, for example, in the Times today, they have a ton of coverage on this conflict. They seem to conflate Palestinians and Hamas. And I wonder how fair that is. What kind of support do you think Hamas has in Gaza?
Well, you're right. It's not fair to conflate millions of Palestinians with one movement, even if that movement is governing at the moment inside the Gaza Strip. It's impossible to say exactly how much support Hamas has. I think it has support. The West Bank and Gaza are divided both politically and geographically under different kinds of Palestinian leaderships, both still under Israeli control. I would say, people in the West Bank probably are more supportive of Hamas than people in Gaza who've lived under Hamas's governing. But at the end of the day, when something like this happens, and bear in mind that Israel's now in the midst of a very severe bombing campaign inside Gaza, where, as I said, 2 million human beings live and have nowhere to go. in a very narrow strip of land, and entire neighborhoods have been leveled to the ground. So I think it's impossible to overstate the ferocity of the Israeli attack. And I think we have to be mindful that, as horrific as the attacks were inside Israel, we also have to remember that there are human beings also in the Gaza Strip who are suffering and who are dying by the hundreds, and without much say in what's going on.
In fact, I read a UNICEF report this morning that estimated there are roughly 1 million children living in the Gaza Strip, meaning that almost half of the people there are, UNICEF says children are people who are under the age of 15.
Okay.
So almost half of the people there are under the age of 15, in which case, they certainly can't support Hamas. They're not capable of making that kind of decision.
So, Khaled, that kind of raises the question here. Do we have any idea, or based upon your research, do you have any idea what, other than extracting some level of retribution or revenge, what do you think Israel's strategy is in terms of its response that we expect any day now?
Tragically, I don't think they have a strategy. I mean, what they've stated is to remove Hamas, or to end Hamas's military and governing capabilities. Nobody really knows what that means. I'm certain, from having talked to many Israeli officials in the past, that they don't know what that means. I think right now they are in a very high state of emotion and trauma. And it is primarily the response is really one of retribution, as you said, and those are actually the words that Israeli military leaders are using, that we're not after precision, we're looking to cause damage, and we're seeing that on the ground. I think there is considerable evidence that civilians are being targeted. They're bombing neighborhoods, they're bombing infrastructure, they're bombing roads, preventing ambulances from reaching, the wounded and so forth. And so it's right now emotions are running high. And so what needs to happen is there needs to be a responsible third-party actor in the international community, presumably someone like the United States that has considerable leverage, to intervene and really bring this to an end, because creating more death and destruction is not going to resolve any of the underlying issues, and in fact is just going to make things worse.
It's difficult not to be emotional about this when you
Sure.
read the reports of what Hamas has done. And I suppose you could say the same thing in defense of the Palestinians when you read the history of what's happened, and you could say the same thing in support of the Jews when you read the history of what's happened. So, there's this back and forth. One thing I can't understand is why Iran can fund and support Hamas and Hezbollah, why they are allowed to do that, essentially, promoting terrorism, why nothing is done about it. Why is Iran allowed to, reportedly they fund up to 90% of Hamas's budget, and they're pursuing enriched uranium to build a nuclear bomb. Why is that allowed, even by other Arab states?
Well, I mean, setting aside the nuclear issue, which is a whole other topic, but
Okay.
but Iran, Iran is not an Arab state, but it is a key player in the region, and they support many different armed groups in different countries like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, and others in Iraq and different places. Hamas is one of the groups that it supports. From Hamas's perspective, they are a non-state actor. They need support from some patron, some sponsor. Iran is a willing sponsor. Iran has an interest in opposing Israel, in creating problems for Israel. And what better way to do that than to support groups whose mission it is to attack Israel and
to
to
eradicate Israel, to murder Jews. I mean,
Well,
it's one
I
thing
mean,
to support a
we have
non-state
to-
actor, but you can't support terrorists. And Hamas, given what
Sure.
we've seen over the weekend, is clearly a terrorist group, right?
I mean, Hamas certainly is a group that has carried out horrific acts of terrorism. There's no question about that. These are war crimes, and they should be held accountable. Anyone involved in the planning or the sponsoring or the financing or the execution of any of these attacks should be absolutely held accountable. But I think we have to be careful in how we frame the issue. Hamas is not. I mean, Hamas is a political movement. There's no serious actor who believes that Hamas can destroy Israel.
Right.
Whatever the rhetoric comes out of any political movement.
Yep.
Rhetoric is rhetoric. I mean, if we take all political and military leaders at their rhetoric,
Exactly.
then
Khaled,
it would be. Yeah.
Unfortunately, Khaled, I have to just cut it short right here because of time, but we really appreciate you taking the time, sharing your thoughts with us.
You're listening to The Team. Catch our live program, Bloomberg Markets, weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app, or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
Big M&A trade here today. ExxonMobil buying Pioneer Natural Resource, $60 billion. This is a big-time play on shale. Let's break it down with Fernando Valle. He is a senior analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, covering all the energy space. He joins us live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. So let's start first with the price, the valuation. Did they have to pay up to get this thing here?
A little bit, but when you look at the breakdown on the free cash flow per share, the EBITDA per share after the dilution, it's actually accretive right away to ExxonMobil, provided they can capture that $1 billion in synergies, which is the low end of their target, $2 billion being the high end.
And it's all stock deal?
All stock.
Nice. That's good to do. You don't have to go out and borrow it. Some crazy
I had read an analyst saying, if they pay a moderate premium, then they can still make money on this. But does it have to be only a moderate premium, or are they going to make money hand over fist?
I believe they'll make money hand over fist regardless because of two factors. First, we've talked about the underinvestment in the industry over the past decade. And although we're bearish in the short-term demand side of the equation, longer term, we think that will be the driver of oil prices. But second, Pioneer has the largest undeveloped resource base in the Midland Basin, which gives Exxon a huge region to develop over the next 10 years.
So Matt and I were just noticing that this is just a good old-fashioned buy up some, old-fashioned fuel, oil, shale, whatever it is. There's no carbon. There's no solar here. There's no wind here. There's no eco-friendly thing here. There's no green here. This is good old-fashioned big oil company buying another big Texas oil company. Right? Yeah. This is old time.
But they said it was good for the environment.
They said it was good for the environment. I'm not sure where they get that from.
Well, there's two factors. Yes, it is exactly that. And Darren Woods, in his interview with Alex Steele, said they don't believe peak oil's upon us, and that we'll still use oil and gas for a really long time. And then their point on reducing emissions is that because they're developing this carbon capture center in the Gulf Coast, they'll actually be able to take all of Pioneer's production and take it there and capture that carbon and use and reduce their emissions.
Okay.
So on a net basis, this becomes a lower emissions.
So they bury that stuff, right?
They bury. Eventually, the goal is to use it for power generation, but we're still a little bit away from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll buy it.
Sounds interesting.
Some geologist somewhere came up with that idea.
So Alex Steele was on here earlier and told us we pump 13 million barrels a day, more than Saudi Arabia in this country. Talk to us just for a brief moment about energy independence. What does that mean? I mean, if, for example, we no longer could import any oil or petroleum products to the U.S., would we still be okay with prices hovering around where they are now?
Likely not, unless you're counting imports from Canada and Mexico as well, and looking at that as one integrated system. The issue is that the shale oil that we produce is very light, and it's one of the reasons we export a fair amount of our shale crude and still import. Then Paul's favorite.
What are light crudes used for as opposed to heavy?
So light crudes tend to produce more gasoline and naphtha, and then medium crudes produce diesel and jet fuel. So we need to balance that in our crude diet. And then Paul's favorite act, the Jones Act, prevents us to moving some of that crude into the East Coast that could process some of that crude. So we'd have to revoke that act. We would have to also adjust our refining capacity.
All right, talk to us. So I bring up the oil from the shale in Texas. How do I get it to where it needs to go? How does that happen?
Pipelines. Primarily pipelines, and that's one of the
Is that
the
midstream,
wrinkles.
what you guys call midstream?
Yeah, midstream is the whole processing side. So we separate oil from gas, from water, from the natural gas liquids, and then we move it out to the production centers, refineries, fractionators, etc. And one of the wrinkles in this deal is that it will make it harder for the midstreams and service players because Exxon is now going to be, nearly over 10% of Permian production. They'll have a lot of say on how that the pricing goes in that market. And it will also make it harder for smaller independent players to get those services because you need to be exposed to Exxon, and they will have a driver's seat in that area.
Oh, so do we need to talk to Jennifer Rhee, Bloomberg Intelligence? She's an antitrust person. Is this deal going to get approved, do you think?
So I was speaking to Jennifer earlier, and she thinks because it's less than 15% of Permian production, there's a good chance that it will get approved.
Okay.
But the timeline may be beyond the first half of 2024, and it will be a challenge. Typically, the way they argue is that oil is a global market, and we export crude, so we're actually competing with the Saudi Aramcos and the Gazproms of the world, and not just with the Pioneers and EOGs.
So are we going to, if I'm an energy investment banker in Houston, am I just ripping up the phone here, calling everybody I can, my Rolodex, trying to get some deals done?
Well, you're calling 4 companies primarily. Okay. You're calling ConocoPhillips, you're calling Chevron, you're calling Occidental, and maybe you're calling EOG Resources, and you're saying, who do you want?
Right.
And then perhaps you're calling all the private equity players and be like, hey, we need to get together and create a better, larger player, or else we're going to be taken up by larger players.
What about BP and Shell? Where are they in the Permian Basin?
So Shell sold their acreage to ConocoPhillips, so they're no longer in the Permian Basin, and they really have moved away from shale. BP had bought BHP Billiton's shale portfolio. They haven't been very aggressive in the Permian, and it's kind of a question mark because they changed their CEO after Bern Looney was forced to resign a couple of months ago.
All right, we got WTI crude oil, $84 a barrel here. It did, spike up Monday, 4 or 5% on the news coming out of Israel. What's the feeling now when you talk to the energy folks about just kind of the geopolitics of that part of the world and what it really means for global supply, I guess?
Well, the fear is Iran. What happens with Iran is this war going to escalate to that part of the world, and if it does, how will it impact the oil flows and also the exports of crude?
How much does Iran, I guess, produce or export? Or
they produce around 3 million barrels a day, and they export just north of 1.2 million barrels a day. So it's about 1% of the world consumption in exports. It's not that significant, except that supply is relatively tight. Again, as we said, our fear is on the demand side, and that we think could be the bigger driver. But if Iran does go into war, wars consume a lot of fuel, consume a lot of oil, so that could shift the narrative entirely.
But it's fungible. So we could be okay as long as we hold Canada and Mexico as allies.
Exactly. Exactly. And we could also, we have other allies, including in the UK and Norway, that produce a fair amount of crude, and Brazil and others that can help fill our needs.
By the way, I saw a pipeline had been damaged between Finland and Estonia today. Did you see that?
Yes.
And apparently, at one point, this is a young pipeline. It's only 3 years old. Nonetheless, Finland gets almost all of their gas through this pipeline.
I mean, Europe is in a very comfortable place with natural gas inventories. The issue is if there are disruptions in movements because their diesel inventories are very low, and that's the backup to the natural gas. And obviously they closed a lot of nuclear plants over the past year in Belgium and Germany. If there is a disruption, especially in the Strait of Hormuz between Qatar and Iran, where we get a lot of the natural gas shipments to Western Europe, that leaves them in a very precarious position if we have a normal to cold winter.
Got to put LNG terminals in over there.
Yeah, and can you put what is the LNG situation over in Europe? Can't we just? I thought you can build them pretty quickly.
Well, they didn't want to build them back when Dan Brouillette was over there.
But that's to regasify. We need the gas first, and Qatar and Iran share the largest gas field in the world, the North Field, and Qatar is the largest producer of LNG in the world.
Interesting. Man, it all comes back to
There's a big gas field in the Netherlands, but they've decided to shut it down.
Yeah, I heard that. All right, Fernando, thanks so much for joining us. Fernando Valle, he's our senior global energy guy for Bloomberg Intelligence.
You're listening to The Tape. Catch our live program, Bloomberg Markets, weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Economic outlook, inflation, interest rates, geopolitics is front and center once again, first in Ukraine and now in Israel. Let's see how some of these professionals kind of put that into their calculus. Kara Murphy joins us. She's the CIO at Kestra Investment Management. Kara, thanks so much for joining us via Zoom here. Talk to us about kind of, like the rest of us, we woke up over the weekend and saw the terrible news coming out of Israel. As a professional investor, how does that factor into your calculus, if at all?
It's interesting. I've been a chief investment officer for a long time, and I've given a lot of presentations on our, global market outlook. And there's usually always a slide at the end of the deck that says risks. And there's always a line item there that says geopolitical risks. And exactly which risks are sort of simmering under the surface might change over time. But there's always a possibility of some sort of conflagration around the world. And typically, often when we see a geopolitical event outside the U.S., the main transmission mechanism by which it starts to affect global markets is through oil, right? So we saw this particularly in Ukraine when Russia invaded, now conflict in the Middle East. And so I think that's the biggest immediate concern in terms of the impact on the U.S. economy. And so far, markets have really been largely shrugging it off. Now, if this continues to be, a big focus and continues on for a long time, really starts to affect the supply of oil, that then will drive the price of oil up, which then will complicate matters for the Fed here at home. The other piece of it, of course, is military funding, where now we have the U.S. government helping to fund war in Ukraine and now war in Israel. And that does cost money. It is, a commitment that the U.S. has made, but will start to hurt the U.S. budget in some way at the same time when the budget is already under pressure. And we have discord in Washington. So it's sort of the layering of these risks that starts to become an issue.
I wonder to what extent the drop in yields is a reaction to the Middle East, or is it a reaction to the Fed speak that we've heard over the last couple of days?
I still think that the U.S. markets are being driven more by the Fed than by what's happening outside the U.S. The Fed has been such a focus over the last couple of years, and they've done a great job so far in being able to bring down inflation. But this last mile for them to go on inflation is still really, really important in how long interest rates remain high. And the longer interest rates remain high, the tougher it's going to be for the economy to muddle through.
All right, so Kara, let's switch gears a little bit, focus on another data point for this market to kind of digest, and that is earnings. Corporate earnings really kicking off in earnest Friday with some of the big banks. What are you looking for this quarter from corporate America?
For the big banks, it's always really helpful that they go kind of early in the earnings season because they do have a really great view kind of across the country in terms of what's happening in both the corporate sector and the consumer sector. So what we'll be looking for is particularly on the credit side. Are we starting to see evidence that companies and individuals are feeling the pinch of higher interest rates? I think the answer is yes. So the question remains, how much are they really feeling the pinch and how much should we be worried about it? Banks are going to have to start increasing credit reserves in anticipation of that, growing pinch. So I think that'll be a really helpful view of what's happening on the ground. The other piece that we're going to have to look out for are consumer shopping habits. We've started to hear little anecdotes from retailers come through that, again, consumers are starting to feel the pinch a little bit, but hearing about the on-the-ground behavior and expectations, particularly heading into the very crucial holiday shopping season, will give us a good sense of how consumers are feeling.
Yeah, it'll be interesting as I just saw a chart from Torsten Slok this morning that movie viewership has dropped dramatically.
In theaters?
In theaters. Yep. But maybe that's just a result of there not being a lot of great movies. We just had Barbenheimer, and I just want to see
you're not going to get
Dumb Money.
anything. You're not going to get anything until the holidays.
Taylor Swift movie's coming.
The Taylor Swift movie's coming.
True.
I thought we were all going to see that together.
There's huge impact there, right? Yep. What, Kara, what areas of the market do you like in terms of the risk assets that that we have on offer here? What are the sectors you like?
Yeah, so this has been a really tough year for anybody with a diversified portfolio, because if you didn't own something in the big seven, you significantly lagged what you saw happening in the broad market. That said, we still think that the leadership is going to start to change, and where it's no longer just going to be the big seven or the magnificent seven, whatever you want to call them. So we're looking to go down cap a little bit. It doesn't mean you have to be in micro cap names, but sort of outside the market a little bit more outside the U.S. And then on the credit side, again, because of this increasing pinch of higher interest rates, we would be cautious, particularly in things like high yield, where a lot of these companies are going to be hurt by a continuation of higher interest rates. And then spreads are at such a place where you're not really being paid to take on that extra risk.
On the equity side, Kara, how do you feel about valuation here? I guess there's two ways to look at it. One, just kind of looking at the broad S&P, and you could make an argument that fairly fully valued, if not a little bit on the expensive side. But if you take out some of the big cap names, which have had such big runs, whether it's 6 or 7 names, maybe it looks a little bit better. How do you think about it?
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's not one single story across the market. And even if you look at it just by sector, technology is really the only sector that's trading at a significant premium to its 10-year historical average. Even consumer discretionary, which at first glance looks a little expensive, is actually trading right in line with its historical average. And then you have something like energy, where valuations are half their historical average. So there are certainly areas of the market that don't look overstretched. And then even on a broad basis, we're more expensive than average, but not extremely so. And that tends to not be a great indicator of what direction the market is going next.
By the way, I'm looking at one of the stories that's popping up is, when clients click on our Bloomberg stories a lot, I have an alert, so I see what they're watching. Right now, Ozempic shows kidney promise in bloated dialysis firm. That's a big story, and I talked to the PepsiCo CFO yesterday. His view on Ozempic, whether it's hurting Pepsi sales, he says not yet. Walmart says GLP-1 users are buying fewer calories. Which is I think, pretty cool thing in itself that they can even track that. But what do you think about this move? It's like AI Junior, right? GLP-1s.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, like I've read the reports, all those ones that you mentioned, and Ozempic and other drugs like it seem to be the wonder drug, right? They cause us to eat less, they cause us to lose weight, have a healthier heart, and now a healthier kidney. So let's all say that having healthier Americans and healthier people around the world is a good thing. Then the question is, how do you actually invest alongside it? And you mentioned some of the soft drink companies. Those guys have been under pressure for a very long time because of growing healthier habits of Americans. So this isn't necessarily new. It just sort of accelerates many trends that have already been in place.
All right, Kara, thank you so much for joining us. As always, appreciate getting your thoughts. Kara Murphy, she is the Chief Investment Officer at Kestra Investment Management.
You're listening to The Tape, Kestra Live program, Bloomberg Markets, weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app, or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
I want to get the latest reporting. We do that with Galit Altstein. She's a reporter with Bloomberg News. She joins us from Tel Aviv. Galit, thanks so much for joining us. I know a very difficult time.
Sure.
What is the latest that you can tell us about what you believe, or what is a consensus building about the type of response that we will get from Israel?
Yeah, so actually today we're also seeing some developments in the north of Israel. This has been obviously a big question over the past few days on whether the Northern Front will also be joining in, mainly Hezbollah, which is an Iranian-backed group in the south of Lebanon and Lebanon in general. So over the past half hour or so, we've been getting reports on possibly some UAVs that have penetrated Israel through the northern border. We do not have too much details on that yet. I can only tell you that a lot of people, roughly 1.5 million Israeli civilians have been called to go into safe rooms, into safe places and stay there until the picture is clearer. And earlier today, we also saw some back and forth. It wasn't as possibly dramatic as what we're seeing now. Once again, we don't exactly know what is going on now, but earlier on we saw some back and forth between Hezbollah and IDF forces, some back and forth fire across the border. So we're looking a lot at that today as well.
Paint a picture for us, Galit, of the differences between what's happening now and the past incursions that you face, or the past back and forths, because typically, as I understand it, Israelis just continue to go about their business, and I would imagine there's not much of an economic impact, but this has been compared to a 9/11, it's been compared to a 1973 Yom Kippur War. Is it different this time in that people are not necessarily going to work, not necessarily going out and buying things, not necessarily doing much except for sort of huddling scared in safe rooms?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we obviously don't have all the economic data yet to back this up, but I can definitely tell you that people are staying home a lot and not coming into work. There's actually a combination, I think, of a lot of people that have been called to serve in the Army Reserve Forces. So we've had 300,000 of those. And then there are some people who need to stay at home because the children have not been going to school throughout the entire country. I mean, all over Israel, schools have not been open since Saturday. I mean, since Sunday in effect. Sunday is a business day in Israel. So, and they've just announced today that schools are not coming back at least until next Sunday. So some of the parents, need to stay at home with your children. And then we also have people who are just afraid because Israel is still under missile attacks from the south, from Gaza. This is affecting mostly the southern part of Israel, but also, every once in a while, the central parts like Tel Aviv in the vicinity. So what we're seeing basically is, people working from home if they can, or not coming into work. And this is very reminiscent to many people that I speak to of COVID, of the first days of COVID and, the first lockdowns. So in some cases, it's not, direct, instruction from the authorities, don't leave the house like a lockdown. In some places it is, in some places it isn't, but it is reminiscent of that. And I think it's just worth noting and that some businesses and some international businesses that operate in Israel, I'm talking about some retail stores, H&M, IKEA. I know that these stores, for example, have been shut down for the last few days. So obviously business consumption is definitely down these days, yes.
What do we know about this new unity government that Mr. Netanyahu has announced? Tell us about that.
So this is news from this afternoon. So actually, this is in fact a new party, Benny Gantz's party. He was an opposition leader until just this afternoon, and he just joined forces with Netanyahu. Netanyahu's government, his former government, stays in effect. But what we're seeing now is Gantz's party join in, basically to form a very narrow war managing cabinet. And this cabinet will see as its members Netanyahu himself, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and joining them will be Benny Gantz, who is a former defense minister, and two more members in this cabinet, one from Gantz's party and one from Netanyahu's party. And actually, they will be leading any operations, the war, you can say, that will be moving on from moving forth from now on. These are people who are very experienced. I'm mainly speaking about Gantz and another member of his party, Eisenkot, and of course, Defense Minister Galant. They're all very senior former IDF officers. Some have led the Israeli army. Galant was previously in charge of the Southern Command. He's very familiar with the Gaza Strip, and they're the ones who are going to be leading the war effort from here on.
I wonder if this changes the picture in terms of, regional allies of Iran. What have you heard from other Arab states, especially considering the fact that we know Iran funds Hamas, we know Iran funds Hezbollah, and they've been responsible for something that's beyond a military attack, really just targeting citizens. And I know that's happened in the past, but at this point, now the world has seen it. Do you expect any pushback on Iran?
That's a very good question. And, I'm not sure.
It just seems, Galit, that everyone is hesitant. Yeah. From here, it seems everyone is hesitant to push back on Iran. When the Wall Street Journal first reported that Iran knew about these attacks and even was involved in the planning, or that the IRGC was involved in the planning, we had, the Secretary of Defense saying, well, we haven't seen any evidence. Not eager to draw Iran into this because it makes things more difficult. On the other hand, we all know they're funding Hamas.
Yeah, well, yeah, the relationship between Iran and Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah is a slightly different one. You're right to say that Iran finances both Hamas and Hezbollah. With Hamas, it's on a much lower scale. I'm talking about the financing, and they're a different organization because they're a Sunni. Hamas is a Sunni organization, so they are cooperating with Iran and they're getting money from them, but they don't necessarily take orders from Iran, even if they're coordinated with them. I know it sounds a little complex, but it is. While Hezbollah in the north of Israel is 100% Iran. It's just, a proxy organization, a militant organization that is backed by Iran, that is led by Iran, that is, taking orders from Iran. So, and on your question, I think that, maybe what speaks loudest at this time is that, when we see the U.S. carrier, the Gerald Ford carrier that is now, around Israeli waters, this is a very extraordinary sight. I would put it like that. Mm-hmm. I don't remember anything, of this sort happening at least over the last decades. So this is like a warning sign, which may be a reinforcement of what you just said. If people don't, countries don't want an all-out war. So they're putting their biggest warning signs and telling Iran, don't get involved, not through Hezbollah, not directly, and so it's safe to assume that yes, maybe the nations don't want an all-out war at this time, and Israel definitely wants to concentrate on Gaza now, but keeps saying that it is very well prepared for anything that happens in the north with Hezbollah.
Very good. All right, Galit, thank you so much once again for joining us. Galit Altstein, she's a reporter with Bloomberg News. She's based in Tel Aviv, and we really appreciate getting some of her time during this very, very difficult time for all Israeli citizens. And we'll see what type of response that we get from Israel. But all, I guess, indications are that it's going to be severe as we look at the call-ups and so on.
You're listening to The Tape. Catch our live program, Bloomberg Markets, weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Matt Miller, Paul Sweeney, live here in a Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio, and we are streaming this thing on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio. Matt, I'm at an age where I just don't stay up that late anymore. So I'm not like the late night TV. I used to be a fan. I was there for Letterman and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, dude, I remember Letterman from the very beginning.
But I understand that's where the cool kids hang, is kind of late night TV, which brings us to Max Abelson. Why he's here, I don't know. Max Abelson, he's one of our star reporters for Bloomberg News. He joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. But Max, you're going TV on us. You're going Hollywood. Talk to us about the show that you're bringing to Bloomberg Originals.
Yeah, my ego is too big now, actually, to talk, so I'm just going to fall into silence now. Well, first of all, just about bedtime.
Like Joaquin Phoenix.
Yep. Let's talk bedtime, because I am out by like 9:30, just to be totally clear. So I'll be watching the following day, but I'm hoping everyone here is going to tune in on Thursdays at 10:30 p.m. on Bloomberg TV. Listen, I think there's a chance that what we're making here is like going to be really special and really good. I mean, we had a really big challenge, which is that Businessweek is like a good thing as is. It's a great magazine. It's when I have my best journalism of the year, if I'm lucky, it gets to go in Businessweek. And to make something that's a really good magazine and to try to turn it into something televisual is hard, because like magazine and TV are different things. But we have had a lot of fun with this idea that instead of like sitting there, kind of stuck with the issue that week, although I'm sure we would have fun if we had to do that, what we've done, gentlemen, is take the themes that would normally kind of course below the surface of business journalism and Businessweek specifically: ambition, risk, failure, genius, imagination. And we've dedicated episodes to each of them. And then we've brought on honestly, kind of astounding people whose lives and careers and ideas honestly have something to say about those themes. I've learned a lot, sitting at the table, talking to people. It's been fun and it's been eye-opening.
All right, so what's the format? You're going to go on, this show is going to go out every Thursday at 10:30 on Bloomberg TV. I'm guessing we're going to be able to watch it on Bloomberg.com or somewhere online the next day.
YouTube,
and then, so is it an hour, 2? Do you have 1 guest, 4? How does it work?
Thank you for asking. These are questions that remind me of my mom, Patty Abelson, who's been asking just these exact questions. All right, so look. It's going to start with a kind of essayistic introduction. My only complaint about this whole series is that we film me walking through the streets of New York, and I have to memorize my essay, and it is not easy. No one tells
That's called a monologue, by the way. That's called a monologue in late night TV.
It's a monologue. I have no teleprompter. So I'm in the streets of New York. I give a little opening essay. Then I come to the studio, which, let me just say, my colleagues carpentered a studio. It's not. We're not talking LED screens.
Is it here?
Here
by the escalator.
1 floor up. One for listeners can't see this, but we are on the 5th floor.
They can if they're streaming on YouTube. We're streaming, Max. Look into the camera.
Well, they're not in the building. So they wouldn't know. But it's on the 6th floor, and it's I mean, when I say carpentered, I mean woodworkers made it. It looks like kind of an eccentric editor-in-chief of a magazine.
It looks so cool. I have to say.
1978. It is beautiful, and there's something about the vibe. I mean, actually, I've always loved this studio where we are now, but there's something about the vibe where I feel like even interesting or powerful or complicated people come in, and it's it almost reminds me of a therapist's office. There's something about it where I find that people are willing to open up, and I'm definitely willing to meet them where they are. But our guests so far have been really willing to meet us where we are, which is taking these themes seriously. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to talk about failure. It's not easy to talk about ambition. But I find that there's something about the space, and there's something about my colleagues. Edwina Otira, I have to say, our director and producer, is really one of my favorite people I've ever worked with. Combined, thanks to Businessweek, thanks to the show, thanks to the set, my colleagues, there's something that I think is kind of special about it, and I feel I think it might be kind of unlike anything we've ever done here.
It does look like, I have to agree, a really cool space and very unique and kind of different, a step away from reality without being fake, but just a therapist's office, I think, is a great description because you're sort of putting the world on pause to have these discussions. So who are the guests that you've had on?
Well, I'll tell you about the guests, but first I just want to respond to a very beautiful thing you just said, a step away from reality. It's been very, I've thought a lot about how to make television, which is very different from what I normally do. I'm a writer, I'm a reporter here. I've spent a long time here, my whole professional life in this building, 13 years, I think, writing and reporting and being on TV and even, honestly, being on radio. Yep. It involves a certain amount of theater, certain kind of performance. It makes me think about my voice when I'm talking now, or when I'm on TV, I think about the way I look, the way I move my hands. And we've really spent a long time talking as a group about how to make it as real as possible. Even though I have to do some performative things, not move my hands in silly ways, not talk too much. We've really tried to keep it as connected to reality as print journalism can be. Now let me tell you about the guests.
But with a set that evokes a 1970s newsroom feel.
Thank you. But
that you wouldn't see today in any newsroom. Right. So you're trying to make it real, but also It's I was reminded kind of like of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Like the set in Taxi. Like basically one set that's different from everything else, but that you want to be paying attention to.
Matt, you're talking my language. We have a signed photo of Fred Rogers in the studio, signed to me as a little boy. Thanks to my dad. But let me just talk about the guests. So for this week's episode, Genius, Thursday night, we have a 91-year-old genius, Bert Malkiel, who's writing, you gentlemen probably
Random Walk Down Wall
Street, which is a book about how genius doesn't actually exist in the markets. He is so interesting. He has so much to say. It's such a distinct version of genius. Then we have a 17-year-old genius who won the spelling bee. I'm going to say very little about her because she is such a surprise, and she has. I think she is my most genius guest. But I'm not going to say too much more about her. And then we have Morba Jah, who is the genius. In fact, he literally won a Genius Grant. He is the guy who thinks about all the garbage that's floating around our orbit, all the dead stuff that we sent out satellites, but then they died, and they're just there. It's like this new kind of trash. And he really did blow my mind the way that he talked about the difference between individualized genius and a kind of collective genius, and the way that you can learn from other people instead of just like being a genius yourself.
Standing on the shoulders of giants.
Exactly. I found it honestly very moving. I was told I had to stop nodding along because I was nodding along too much. That's how much I enjoyed it.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. I can't wait to see this, honestly.
And so what's the difference between kind of what you have been doing, interviewing, calling people on the phone, calling your sources and that kind of thing, as opposed to now you're sitting face to face with these people oftentimes, and that's a little different vibe, right?
Oh, the vibe is tremendously different. Like right now, I'm looking at you, and we're talking like, I'm not in the mood to confront you. I don't want to press you on the most difficult things that you've ever had to live through, or like, if you were a prominent business person, your most prominent embarrassments, because embarrassment comes with success. No one has success without failure. To sit across this table in the Businessweek show's set and to talk to people about pain and uncertainty and embarrassment, or even just to talk to them about their ambition, or to talk about their genius, or to talk about their imagination. There's something that's very awkward about it. I'm very interested in trying to re-examine the journalistic encounter. I love my favorite journalist is Janet Malcolm, who writes beautifully about the kind of betrayals that happen every time there's a journalistic encounter, because the journalist is going to tell a story and the subject has a very different story. And it's been really fun for me to see in real time how different it is to stare your subject in the eyes, and it's spooky.
That's very cool. I mean, we love your stories that you write for Bloomberg, but I can imagine it's very different because you get to kind of script everything. You totally create the narrative by yourself, or with your editors, whereas here you can script the questions and you can stage the interview, but it's going to go where it goes.
Yes. Hearing you say that reminds me that my beat in a way is Money and Power. When I ask, honestly, my beat is like semi-made up, but Wall Street culture, Wall Street money and power. It really has got me thinking about the way that we have power. Like journalists have power. We shape stories. We bring perspective. I mean, I believe that one of the things that makes Bloomberg News and Businessweek great is that we wield our power well, and that we wield it with fairness, and we wield it with authority. But it's been fun to feel powerful and also to feel a little powerless. I don't know what people are going to say. I don't know if they're going to dislike my questions. I don't know if our vibe is going to be weird. And that's a powerless position to be in. I have the power. I have some power because I'm asking questions. But it's been a very powerless experience, and it's been really fun to taste it.
What's the name of the show?
The Businessweek Show.
The Businessweek Show on Bloomberg Television, Thursday nights, 10:30 p.m. Wall Street time. Boom. Mark that. Max Abelson, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for listening to the Bloomberg Markets Podcast. You can subscribe and listen to interviews at Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast platform you prefer. I'm Matt Miller. I'm on Twitter at MattMiller1973.
And I'm Paul Sweeney. I'm on Twitter at PT Sweeney. Before the podcast, you can always catch us worldwide at Bloomberg Radio.